Hello, I'm Cunningham, and I'm here at the African American Historical Society Museum in Jersey City. I'd like to introduce you to some hidden footprints, traces of past lives that lived right here where we live, and walked through the same paths that we walk through every day here in Jersey City. Why call them hidden footprints? Well, the lives that we will be tracing are those of African Americans whose home was Jersey City, either willingly or unwillingly, since the earliest days of settlement here in the 1600s. And it is important to note that historians have been far from fair in depicting these early settlers, whether slave or free. For example, did you know that African Americans from Jersey City fought in various wars that this country was involved in, including the Civil War? Did you know that for the most part, New Jersey and Jersey City was sympathetic to the Southern cause and the institution of slavery? In fact, for a while, the largest slave population in the state was right here in what was then Bergen County. Yet Jersey City, due to its geographic location and some sympathetic citizens, was a very important stop on the Underground Railroad. And I'll bet you didn't know that in the early 1900s, there was both a black-owned financial institution, the John Brown Building and Loan Association, and a black-owned motion picture studio, the Frederick Douglass Movie Company. The force behind these institutions was Dr. George Epps Cannon, a prominent Jersey City physician and political leader who had both state and national renown. African Americans, from the first slave to arrive at Jersey City, then Hossimus, in 1640, and the Dutch-speaking slaves of Communipaw, to our large community of over 70,000 African Americans today, have always participated in our city's development and our nation's history. And through the many hardships we have faced, we have persevered and we have survived. And we should be aware and proud of the role that we have played in those decades of time. Today, we'll show you some places that you think you know all about, but you'll be surprised at the hidden footprints of history that are among our everyday stops. The Dutch ruled over a large colony, which they called New Netherlands. This territory included the part of New York State bounded on the north by the Mohawk River, on the east by the Connecticut River, and south all of New Jersey, bounded by the Delaware River. There was no natural western boundary, but the frontier extended as far as 50 miles west of the Hudson River. The area that is now Jersey City was located just across the Hudson from the capital, New Amsterdam. After having expanded their influence to the African continent and its lucrative slave trade, the Dutch in 1619 founded the Dutch West India Company in order to facilitate and maximize its operations in the New World. In 1658, the governor of New Netherlands, Peter Stuyvesant, purchased from the Indians an area which included Hossimus, Paulus Hook, Communipaw, and Hoboken. Sometimes this area was referred to as Pavonia. The English also saw the potential of this region, and in 1664, New Netherlands was surrendered to English naval forces. The English changed the name of New Amsterdam to New York, while the area west of New York became the English colony of New Jersey. New Jersey was divided into East Jersey and West Jersey. The area that became Jersey City lay in East Jersey. This transition from Dutch to English rule was a significant factor regarding the state of the African slave. It brought about an even harsher form of servitude and a greater multitude of legal restrictions. In 1805, 3 New Yorkers, Varick, Radcliffe, and Day, came into ownership of Paulus Hook, subsequently conveying the land to the Associates of Jersey Company for development. By 1820, Paulus Hook was incorporated. In 1829, the same area was incorporated as Jersey City, but it remained a part of Bergen Township. Bergen Township at this time was still part of Bergen County. The boundary of Jersey City was extended to Grove Street in 1838, and at this time became a municipality separate from Bergen Township. By 1840, the area now known as Hudson County was separated from Bergen County, becoming a county in its own right. In 1841, Horsemas became the town of Van Voss. With the exception of Jersey City, which was then Paulus Hook, and Hoboken, the remainder of present-day Hudson County was Bergen Township. By 1843, the part of Old Bergen Township, lying north of the then New Jersey Railroad near the present State Highway, became North Bergen Township. North Bergen included the area now known as Hudson City. Hudson City became a separate town in 1852 and incorporated as Hudson City in 1855. In 1851, Jersey City absorbed the town of Van Voss, encompassing much of what is now downtown Jersey City. The town of Bergen was recharted in 1855, incorporated with 3 sections, Columbian, Franklin, and Communipaw. In 1857, the section of Bergen Township lying south of the Morris Canal became the city of Bayonne. In 1863, the town of Greenville became a separate township separated from Bergen Township. On October 5, 1869, special elections were held in Jersey City, Bergen, and Hudson City, in which their citizens voted to consolidate, becoming one city, effective March 17, 1870. Finally, the town of Greenville became part of Jersey City, completing the development of the city of Jersey City, in which we live today.
Slavery in New Jersey, the peculiar institution in Jersey City. Most of us are surprised to learn that human beings, Africans, stolen from the shores of Africa, the West Indies, and South America, were sold like cattle and horses right here in the state of New Jersey, and indeed in the city of Jersey City. Far from the plantations of the South, which we usually equate with the cruelties of slavery, northern slave masters controlled the lives and destinies of their human chattels, the first African Americans in Jersey City.
The first slaveholders in this area were the Dutch, who ruled New Netherlands, of which early Jersey City was a part. The first Africans to reach the shores of what now is Jersey City were slaves of the Dutch settlers of New Netherlands. Among the earliest settlers of New Netherlands was Jacob Stapleton, who served as work boss or overseer of the black slaves belonging to the Dutch West India Company. Stapleton and the slaves under his supervision were responsible for the construction of Fort Amsterdam between 1629 and 1635. By 1640, Stapleton moved to the New Jersey side of the Hudson River, establishing residence on the much-celebrated Horsemas Brewery. The brewery was located near Henderson Street and 3rd, near the present-day Newport Mall. Stapleton had married the widow of the brewery's founder, Cornelius Van Voss, who died in 1638. Stapleton introduced slaves to the Van Voss farm. Among these earliest African-American inhabitants of New Jersey, perhaps the first was a slave presented as a gift to Stapleton. This particular slave became the subject of a lawsuit filed by Stapleton's stepson, who claimed 1/2 ownership of the slave. The slave was given to Stapleton by a well-known privateer, Captain Gert Tyson, in appreciation for the entertainment provided to him by Stapleton when the privateer attended one of the wealthy landowners' lavish dinners. The stepson's claim was based upon the fact that one of the 2 sheep consumed at the dinner belonged to his father's estate, and therefore the estate was entitled to 1/2 ownership of the slave. The court ruled in favor of Stapleton. Some historians depict a less harsh system of slavery under the Dutch as compared to the English, who assumed control over New Netherlands in 1664. English control resulted in the formation of the colony of New Jersey, which was then divided into East and West Jersey. By the time the English took New Amsterdam and renamed it New York, slavery was well established there. Its social, economic, and political ties were closely intertwined with the small number of Dutch settlers in Hoboken, Communipaw, Paulushoek, and Harsimus. The Dutch inhabitants on the West Bank also sought human chattel for cheap labor. Unlike the many plantations which could be found in the southern colonies, slavery in New Jersey and other middle colonies found a narrower field for development. There were few large plantations in New Jersey since cotton, tobacco, and rice, best suited for southern climates, were not grown here. However, Dutch farmers sought the ownership of several male slaves to assist with farm labor, while female slaves were utilized to perform domestic work. By 1690, it is thought that nearly all the white inhabitants of the northern part of the state were slave owners. And the buying and selling of slaves continued in the Jersey City area for a long time. In fact, some prominent area residents were deeply involved in the slave trade itself. In August 1757, the following ad appeared in a New York newspaper.
To be sold at Van Bushkirk's on Kill Van Kull, a parcel of likely Negro slaves, men, women, boys, and girls, just arrived from Guinea in the sloop the Williams, David Griffiths, commander. Apply to Rice Williams or to the said David Griffiths.
The sloop probably drew too much water to pull up to the Bushkirk dock on the northern shore of Constable Hook in Bayonne. It probably anchored in the deep waters of the Kill Van Kull and landed its human cargo on the south shore of the Hook. The captured Africans were then marched across the farmlands to a large barn on Bushkirk's homestead, where the slaves are said to have remained until sold.
In the shadow of the Statue of Liberty, just a few miles from the magnificent monument to immigration, Ellis Island, is a spot at the foot of Linden Avenue where once stood an elegant old colonial building. It is said to have been located on a grassy mound sloping to the shore of the bay. Its magnificent parlors were the scenes of many local festivities.
The home was built about 1760 by Captain Thomas Brown, who married into the Van Bushkirk family. Tradition has it that Captain Brown, a noted sea captain, in his early days was very familiar with the coast of Africa and frequently ran into the harbor a cargo of slaves, some of whom were confined in the cellar of the elegant house while he was negotiating their sale. People who resided there tell stories of hearing the swish of oars and the grating of boats upon the beach, followed by the trample of feet from the shore to the cellar, and groans with the rattle of chains. Captain Brown was reputed to be a sturdy patriot and espoused the cause of independence with great vigor, but he could not envision the same freedom for Africans. East Jersey, which included present-day Jersey City, was heavily populated by the Dutch even after the English takeover. West Jersey, on the other hand, came under strong Quaker influence, and that influence had a tremendous impact on the institution of slavery in New Jersey. After a while, few Quakers were slaveholders, and their religious and moral teachings resulted in a general decline in the total number of slaves in West Jersey. Simultaneously, there was growth in the number of free or manumitted African Americans. Prior to 1840, what is now Jersey City and Hudson County was the southern portion of Bergen County. By 1790, there were 11,000 slaves in New Jersey. The county that included Jersey City possessed 2,300 slaves in that same year, making it the largest slaveholding county in the state. Dutch slave owners of Bergen County, which then included Jersey City, prided themselves on their personal liberality towards slaves and supposedly considered blacks part of their extended family. However, prior to 1804, while slave owners in other New Jersey counties sometimes manumitted their slaves by will, there are no records of slaves being freed by Bergen County Dutch before 1804. After 1804, the counties were required to officially record the names of manumitted African Americans. The manumission book for Bergen County, dated June 17, 1804 to August 10, 1841, listed at least 28 manumissions from the area which would eventually become Jersey City, specifically the towns of Bergen and Harsmas. It is reasonable to conclude that those manumissions are not all-inclusive. It is possible that some slaves gained their freedom much earlier. Most of those manumitted were identified by given names only, the exceptions being William Hayes, Thomas Smith, and Tom LaBarge. There were 13 men and 15 women manumitted, all between the ages of 21 and 40, except for Adam, who was 60 years old. Slave owner Cornelius Garibrandt freed Annie, Sally, and Betsy. Slave owner Mary Brown freed Jack and Violet. This was done by last will and testament. Abel Smith freed William Hayes. He also freed Sam and Tom LeBanks. Slave owner Benjamin Taylor manumitted Sam and Sarah. Other local citizens who freed at least one slave were Cornelius Doremus, Job Smith, Mary Vermeer, James and Jacob Pryor, and Cornelius and Richard Van Ripen. Many Jersey City streets take their names from the families of these slaveholders and others such as Michael Vreeland, Cornelius Van Ripen, Jeremiah Van Winkle, and Michael Terhune. The manumitted slaves joined other African Americans who had already gained their freedom and were scratching out a meager living in Jersey City. William Hayes and Tom LeBanks, both listed in the previously mentioned manumission book, were among the taxpayers of Henry Newkirk's tax ledger of 1830 for Jersey City and Harsmas. There were 32 other taxpayers identified as African Americans in that ledger, including several who still carried their Dutch names. Among them were Tom and Jack Vreeland and Hugh Van Cleef. The village of Communipaw was first settled by the Dutch about 1633 at a location east of the present-day Lafayette section at the intersection of what is now Communipaw Avenue and Phillips Street, which is now the borderline of Liberty State Park. Its geography was much different then. The Hudson River came close to Phillips Street, and there was a small group of Dutch farmers at that site for almost 200 years. Indian problems did, however, cause them to flee the area at least 2 times. These Dutch settlers worked their farms and supplemented their income by fishing and oystering in the nearby waters. African Americans were an indispensable part of Communipaw for many years. The famous writer and author Washington Irving, in his History of New York, immortalized the village of Communipaw and its Dutch Negroes with a romantic, though somewhat stereotypical, description of the village and its dark inhabitants.
Nay, it is a well-known fact, which I can testify from my own experience, that on a clear, still summer evening, you may hear from the Battery of New York the obstreperous peals of broad-mouthed laughter of the Dutch Negroes of Communipaw, who, like most other Negroes, are famous for their risible powers. This is the case on Sunday evenings when it is remarked by an ingenious and observant philosopher who has made great discoveries in the neighborhood of New York City that they always laugh loudest, which he attributes to the circumstances of their having their holiday clothes on. These Negroes, in fact, like the monks in the Dark Ages, engross all the knowledge of the place, and being infinitely more knowing than their masters, carry on the foreign trade, making frequent voyages to town in canoes loaded with oysters, buttermilk, and cabbages. They are great astrologers, predicting the different changes of weather almost as certainly as an almanac. They are, moreover, exquisite performers on the 3-stringed fiddles. They almost boast the far-famed powers of Orpheus's lyre, for not a horse or an ox in the place, what at the plow or before the wagon, will budge a foot until he hears the well-known whistle of his black driver and companion. And from their amazing skill at casting up accounts upon their fingers, they are regarded with as much veneration as were the disciples of Pythagoras of yore, when initiated into the sacred quaternary of numbers.
By 1860, according to J. Barnett's Bacon, Communipaw had changed considerably. The laugh of the Negroes and the Negroes themselves had departed. They would, however, return again one day, spurred by the great migrations and the railroads of the future. Despite the self-professed liberality of the Dutch settlers towards their slaves, the peculiar institution was the African Americans' Holocaust. And unlike the docile slaves depicted in many historical accounts, the African American resisted his bondage and the limitations on his freedom constantly. Dutch law, and then English law after 1664, was designed to deal harshly with the rebellious slave. These laws were necessary to control the natural yearnings of the African American to be free. An act of violence against a slave master could result in a trial and burning at the stake within 3 days of the accusation. Slaves were frequently burned at the stake in New Jersey, the last one occurring in 1767. After the Revolutionary War, however, hanging was substituted for burning at the stake. At convenient locations throughout Bergen County, there was placed a whipping post, a stock, and a pillory. The latter two devices had holes for the head, hands, and ankles, in which offenders were locked and exposed to public scorn. The whipping post remained at the town of Bergen, now Jersey City, until 1824. It was located on the east side of Bergen Square, near Journal Square, just south of Academy Street. The last two persons punished there were a dissolute white man and his colored companion. In sharp contrast to the content slave theory, many African Americans escaped slavery when they could. In the area where Cornelius Avenue now is, behind the present-day Jersey City Medical Center, there was once a dense woods of pine and cedar, in the recesses of which during the existence of slavery, runaways were accustomed to hide. In the sanctuary provided by these woods, the fugitives were provided with food by supportive fellows. When this was not possible, the runaways procured food under cover of darkness by stealth and plunder. The slaveholders would occasionally organize hunts, entering the wooded area to recapture their chattel. When the slaveholders were successful, the fugitives were subjected to punishment, which was sometimes very severe. In these same woods, close to where the Jersey City Medical Center now stands, was a spot made sacred to the African Americans as a shrine about which to gather on Bobolation Day, the anniversary of the abolition of slavery throughout the state. Many slaves ran away to Connecticut and New York, where they lived as best they could. When a runaway living in New York died, their friends would bring them back to Communipaw for burial. Their funerals were held at the old Garibrandt Stone House, which used to stand on what is now Phillips Street in the Lafayette section near Liberty State Park. One of the locations for their burial was in the rear of the Garibrandt homestead. This site is identified on old maps as the African Burial Ground. Research has uncovered some of the newspaper advertisements offering rewards for runaway slaves in this area. In 1764, a reward of 70 shillings was offered for the return of a runaway named Harry. He spoke good English, French, and Spanish, and a little of other languages. This African American's talent for foreign languages may have been the result of having been owned by various masters of different cultures, or of having served on merchant ships. Slave owner Cornelius Garibrandt reported the loss of his Negro boy named Frank, about 19 years of age. Jane Zabriskie of Bergen Point, now Bayonne, advertised a small reward for her runaway, a Negro man named Jack Thompson. Jack was 19 years old and was wearing when he left summer clothing of a dark mixed round jacket and pantaloons, light-colored waistcoat, and a black hat, and was supposed to have, when he left, a bundle in his hands. A 16-year-old named Tom escaped from Stephen Vreeland of Bergen Township on the 4th of July, 1835. Perhaps Tom saw the incongruity of the Independence Day celebration while slavery yet existed in Jersey City. He was described as pretty black. Richard Van Ripen of Bergen Township found his black boy named Sam missing on Sunday, May 15, 1835. Sam was 20 years old and dressed in moleskin jacket and pantaloons, dark waistcoat, and boots when he went away. On April 21st, 1777, the New York Gazette and Weekly Mercury announced a runaway from Paulus Hook, now part of Jersey City.
A runaway from Paulus Hook, a Negro man called Osborne, about 5 feet 4 inches high, 27 years of age, has a remarkable small waist and bad legs, of a plausible address, pretends to a knowledge of cooking, has a downcast look when he is spoken to by strangers, seemingly the effect of bashfulness, had on when he went off a brown coat, white waistcoat, breeches, and stockings, and a new round hat. Whoever will secure him or give information to the printer so that he may be secured shall receive $5 reward, and 'tis requested that no person will employ him.
In 1800, there were 12,500 slaves in the state of New Jersey. Due to numerous factors, social, political, and legal, this number would gradually decrease until there would be 674 in 1840. It is interesting to note that on the eve of the Civil War, there was still a handful of slaves in the state of New Jersey. That there remained in New Jersey in 1860, 18 persons whose legal status was the equivalent of personal property of their owners, was a sad commentary to the fact that some New Jerseyans resisted the complete abolition of slavery and the loss of their human property until the very end. It was not until the Civil War drew to a close and the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution was passed that slavery was completely and legally abolished in New Jersey. As we shall see, there was much resistance to the abolition of slavery in New Jersey, and once abolition was imminent, there still existed in this state, and in fact in Jersey City, much resentment and sentiment for the Southern cause. Newly arrived immigrants and other poor white laborers viewed the potential freedom of 4 million African American slaves as a threat to their own economic security. One Jersey City newspaper, the American Standard, in a March 7, 1862 editorial stated,
"The working men of the North, for the protection of their families, will find it their duty to reduce the influx on the labor market which is now threatened. And while the emancipation will impoverish the South, it will also bring want, misery, and suffering to many a northern hearthstone, where before fanaticism held its infernal sway, peace, contentment, and plenty smiled. How, under the onerous tax to be imposed, if the northern laborer is to hold out against adverse times to come, his labor cheapened by the unexempted supply, which emancipation will force upon the market, is to us almost incomprehensible."
Slavery would eventually see its end. Yet between 1800 and well into the 1840s, it would continue to be a significant factor in the social and economic life of the state, including the Jersey City area. Human beings continued to be sold like cattle or passed on to heirs by last will and testament throughout this period. On January 3, 1807, Henry Traphagen of Horsemus, which later became Jersey City, purchased from Peter Westervelt of Teaneck, and I quote from the deed, a certain Negro slave of a yellow complexion named Tom, about 17 years of age, to have and to hold the said Negro boy unto him, the said Henry Traphagen and his heirs and assigns forever. Tom was bought for $250. On June 14, 1816, a Negro man named Harry was sold by Daniel Van Ripen to a family member. The church had always been embroiled in the controversy of the slavery issue. This subject will be discussed later, but it is a fact that many church members, people who believe themselves to be upright and outstanding Christians, winked at the evils of human bondage and often participated in this evil. One bill of sale involved the purchase on October 28, 1831, of an African-American boy named Robert, born in December of 1822. He was formerly the property of a Hackensack minister. The boy had been purchased from the pastor of a Mr. Van Ripen's church in Bergen. Historian William H. Richardson tells us that there were several slaves in the early days in the Van Ripen household. The Quaker influence was, however, having a positive impact. One major legislative success was the Gradual Abolition Act of 1804. This law was designed to slowly bring about an end to slavery, while at the same time taking steps to protect the property rights of slaveholders. The Gradual Abolition Act of 1804 declared any African American born after July 4, 1804 to be free. The catch was that he or she would be obligated to serve the slave mother's master until the age of 25 if a male, or 21 if female. Any child born of a slave mother prior to July 4, 1804 would remain a servant to its mother's owner forever. This resulted in many persons being legally classified as slaves for years to come. In 1846, a second New Jersey law was passed. This law further weakened the institution of slavery by substituting apprenticeship for bondage. Slavery was indeed dying a slow death in New Jersey. Long before the first guns of the Civil War were fired, the debate over the issue of slavery was emotional and divisive in the North. In fact, New Jersey was the last northern state to free its slaves. And in Jersey City, where the general feeling was adverse to slaves and abolitionists, even some churches closed their doors to those who wished to speak for the slaves or who denounced the attitude of Congress and the courts in connection with the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. Newspapers in Newark, Trenton, and Jersey City published articles and editorials that expressed support for slavery and sympathy for the South. There were definite economic ties between the industrial northern cities like Newark and Jersey City and the agricultural, slave labor southern states. For most of the 19th century, the shoemakers of Newark provided the footwear for southern planters and their workforce. For generations, the bulk of the carriages, saddlery, harnesses, and clothing manufactured in Newark found a ready and profitable market south of the Mason and Dixon line. After 1810, many New Jerseyans grew concerned about the growing number of African Americans in the state. It was believed that while emancipation was preferable to slavery, that there was little hope of social improvement among the African Americans. It was reasoned that voluntary colonization of blacks in Africa or some other location was a moral and practical solution to the problems which evolved from manumission. The American Colonization Society won many supporters in New Jersey. Perhaps no other free state was so enthusiastic for the expatriation of Afro-Americans. Jersey City was chartered on February 22, 1838. Dudley S. Gregory, its first mayor, was prominent in the endeavors of the American Colonization Society. Yet, while there was much support for the society among the citizenry of New Jersey, free African Americans rejected the idea. while African Americans from throughout the nation responded to some degree to the call for voluntary immigration, free blacks in New Jersey sought to discredit the organization, and they vigorously fought against its programs. Free African Americans wanted equality here in America. Black abolitionists led the fight against the colonization of American blacks. Henry D. Holt, a white citizen of Jersey City, began his newspaper, the Jersey City Advertiser and Bergen Republican, in 1838. For years, he was responsible for the publication of editorials and articles about the inhumanity and inequality of slavery. Meanwhile, another Jersey City newspaper, The Telegraph, frequently referred to the leading African-American abolitionist, the well-known Frederick Douglass, as a nigger. As mentioned earlier, some churches closed their doors to the abolitionist spokesman. But the abolitionist movement also had its friends among the churches and church leaders of Jersey City. In September of 1838, Cornelius Van Voss, a wealthy land proprietor and leading Jersey City citizen, offered the founding members of the First Baptist Church of Jersey City and Horsmus eligible building lots, provided that they would hold no abolitionist meetings in their house of worship. The church declined Van Voss's offer. However, bitter dissension over the abolition of slavery eventually tore this congregation apart, and the controversy would continue to affect the church for some time. One denomination that proved to be a consistent friend of the African American, especially during the Civil War, was the Congregational Tabernacle, which was erected and dedicated on May 3, 1863. The Congregationalists were liberal enough to combine church and secular activities in the tabernacle. Early in the war between the states, a meeting of loyal citizens was held at the tabernacle, which was located on York Street at the corner of Henderson Street, now Luis Munoz Marin Boulevard. The Jersey City Chronicle said that the meeting was one of the largest and most respectable gatherings of ladies and gentlemen ever assembled under one roof in this city. The New York Express, however, tauntingly referred to the gathering as an abolition powwow under the guise of a loyal league meeting. In July of 1863, the draft riots of New York City occurred over a 3-day period. There was a spillover effect in Jersey City. The riots were the result of dissatisfaction among the mostly working-class Irish, who believed that the recently announced draft would disproportionately affect them, and that by going to war, they would help to emancipate millions of African Americans who would then further threaten their own economic well-being by competing for their low-wage jobs. Disgruntled whites rioted on July 13th, 14th, and 15th. They burned black neighborhoods, lynched and assaulted innocent African Americans, including men, women, and children. Some blacks fled the city of New York for safety. A few appear to have sought refuge in the attic of the tabernacle. Hearing of this, a mob gathered and surrounded the tabernacle. They threatened to burn the building down if the blacks were not turned over to the mob. Young Chauncey Holt and other members of the tabernacle secured axe handles from a local hardware store, while the young and youthful Reverend John Milton Holmes, pastor of the tabernacle, stood on top of the roof with a pile of bricks, promising to drop them from the sanctuary if the mob did not disperse. Faith won out over violence. The newspaper, The Standard, reported everything was quiet, just a few boys prowling around burning stables, and that the nigger population was so terrified that they left their homes and took refuge for days, old men, women, and little babies, in the Curry's Woods, and the woods fringing the heights of the city. At that time, Curry's Woods was actually a wooded area. Many Jersey City residents remained sympathetic to the South, including some officials and employees of the municipality. The Common Council, at its September 7, 1861 meeting, found it necessary to pass a resolution directing the police department to be instructed by the chief to aid the officers of the federal government in performance of their duties, and to report to His Honor the Mayor any person holding office whose loyalty is of that doubtful quality that renders it necessary that he should subscribe to the oath of allegiance. But the battle to win the minds and support of the people continued. The Jersey City Chronicle reported that Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist, will deliver a lecture on Friday evening, February 23, 1863, at 7:45 at the Bethesda Baptist Church on South 4th Street. His subject was "The Sure Way to Crush the Rebellion." Tickets were on sale for 25 cents. In May of 1863, William Davis, a contraband, a fugitive slave from Hampton, Virginia, spoke at the Congregational Church. Davis related to the audience his experience in slavery and his escape from the plantation. He encouraged the participation in the war of African-American troops. "Why, give General Butler 100,000 men well armed and equipped," he said, "and he would march through Richmond in 2 weeks." These men of color did go to war, helping to bring about their own freedom, the freedom of their brothers and sisters and children, and the reunification of a torn nation. Meanwhile, throughout the abolitionist era, the Underground Railroad flourished, transporting its passengers to freedom in the North and Canada. Today, when citizens of Jersey City think of an Underground Railroad, the noisy PATH train or New York City subway comes to mind. But prior to the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation, the most successful transportation system ever operated in North Jersey was one about which little is known. Consequently, the stations, conductors, and agents involved in that operation remain as elusive and mysterious as they were during the railroad's heyday. Conductors and agents who worked the Underground Railroad maintained their secrecy because of necessity rather than choice. The passage of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 required citizens to surrender a fugitive slave to anyone who claimed the runaway. The law also required citizens to render assistance to slave hunters. The captured fugitive, on the other hand, could not testify in his own behalf in court. Criminal and civil charges could be filed against anyone who harbored runaway slaves or prevented their capture. In addition to being assessed the value of a slave, the collaborator could be fined or imprisoned. The fugitive slave law made it extremely hazardous for Underground Railroad supporters to use written messages or even the secret code they developed later on. It was necessary to destroy anything that could be used as evidence. Some active workers even discontinued attending abolition meetings in order to avoid the appearance of sympathy for the cause. In short, this legislation made it easier and more profitable for the slave hunters, while it became more dangerous for the active abolitionists. Because of its geographical location, its close proximity to New York City and major transportation facilities and resources, Jersey City became an important transfer point on the Underground Railroad. At least 4 New Jersey Underground Railroad routes converged at Jersey City, and our city was not without stations which served as hiding places, or station agents who protected the fugitives in their care. And this was not an easy task. Spies were employed to report possible fugitives, and slave catchers constantly traversed the various slave escape routes. However, it is known that at many points between Jersey City and New Brunswick, there were men and women who watched for danger and whose warning caused delay or divergence. The fugitives usually slept in safe houses along the various routes during the day. After dark, they were guided into Jersey City or Bergen Township, which is now Jersey City, where on arrival, agents John Everett, Peter Phillips, or some other trusted individuals took charge. Once in Jersey City, the fugitives might be taken to the Hudson River passenger station at the corner of Church and Chambers Streets in New York City, where they would then board a night train to Albany. If necessary, temporary shelter was provided at a house on West Broadway in New York City, where the Tappan brothers conducted an adult Sunday school for African Americans. Sometimes arrangements were made to ship the runaways further up the Hudson River on canal boats, small sloops, and schooners, which were docked at the Horsmus Cove in Jersey City, near the foot of Washington Street, or at the wharf at the foot of Montgomery Street, now Exchange Place in Jersey City. On occasion, spies discovered the fugitives, resulting in captures and daring escapes. One such escape was witnessed by Mr. Daniel Van Winkle, a prominent Jersey City citizen and historian, who later explained how the guides avoided their pursuers by hiding the fugitive in a cave-like compartment beneath the cabin of a coal-laden boat. The entrance was covered by coal, providing protection for the fugitive. The guides eventually dug him out and started him successfully on the road to freedom. Some fugitives were taken to the residence of Dr. Henry Holt, a physician and newspaper publisher who lived on Washington Street in Jersey City. Through the building's rear entrance, the runaways could be transported to Barclay Street in New York City via the Hoboken Ferry. Supplies for the operation were kept at John Everett's house, donated by a chain of contributors, often unknown to the agents themselves. There is one physical reminder of the magnificent Underground Railroad remaining in our city. Directly opposite the Margaret Haig Hospital, at 79 Clifton Place, sits the old Holden Homestead. Built by Professor David L. Holden, it was probably one of only 2 buildings on the street when it was constructed in 1854. The area was then part of the town of Bergen, and the location offered beautiful panoramas with an unobstructed view of the heavens. Mr. Holden, an amateur astronomer, had a gilded dome observatory erected at the top of the building, from which his cousin recorded numerous heavenly discoveries. Holden was an ardent abolitionist, and as a colonel during the Civil War, he trained Jersey City troops for the Union Army. The cellar of his home was often used to hide fleeing slaves en route to Canada or other northern locations. Tradition has it that it was nothing sensational to find 25 or more Negroes sleeping there. This home is occupied to this day by the descendants of David L. Holden. On February 21st, 1861, Abraham Lincoln passed through Jersey City on his way to Washington, D.C. for his inauguration. The president recognized and chatted with Mayor D.S. Gregory, with whom he had served in Congress. When he was sworn in, an anti-Lincoln Jersey City paper, The Standard, professed itself bored at being compelled to perform a professional duty in publishing his inauguration speech. Soon, the president proclaimed the southern states to be in rebellion and called for 75,000 militia from loyal states. On April 18th, the Massachusetts Volunteers, 1,000 strong, reboarded trains in Jersey City and headed for the war. There were no black troops among them. It became evident, however, that the rebellion could not be quelled without utilizing African American troops. Thousands of African American men, free men, former slaves, and runaways answered that call. The state of New Jersey did not organize colored troops. However, they were allowed to recruit black troops in New Jersey who were then assigned to units in other states. This system allowed New Jersey to meet its recruitment quota. It is probable that many recruits left the state on their own to enlist in states that did raise United States colored troops, as they were called. African Americans were recruited in Jersey City. Among the young men from Jersey City who volunteered and are listed in an 1863 Civil War registration book are Richard Connolly, Benjamin H. Shaw, David Prince, John Brown, John Jackson, William Mays, Samuel Young, and Charles H. Harris. All of these soldiers were assigned to the 22nd United States Colored Regiment. The 22nd was organized in Philadelphia in January of 1864 and participated in the battles of Petersburg, New Market Heights, Dutch Gap, Chapin's Farm, and Fair Oaks. At least one soldier from Jersey City who served with the U.S. colored troops was not African American. Mortimer Lamson was appointed Assistant Surgeon of the 36th United States Colored Volunteers. He participated in several engagements, among which were the Siege of Petersburg, the Battle of Fort Harrison, and the capture of Richmond. More than 188,000 African Americans answered the call for service during the Civil War. Many of them were from Jersey City. Among those who were residents of Jersey City who answered that call were Charles Harris, Richard Connolly, and William Mays, all members of the 22nd United States Colored Regiment. Here at Flower Hill Cemetery in North Bergen, New Jersey, is a grave of one brave man who fought in that war. This is the grave of Sergeant Decatur Dorsey. Sergeant Dorsey was a member of the 39th United States Colored Regiment. Prior to his discharge, he had attained the rank of First Sergeant. Sergeant Dorsey is the recipient of the highest award that any soldier can be given for service in this country. He's the recipient of the United States Congressional Medal of Honor. He was born a slave in 1836 in the state of Maryland. After the Civil War, he and his wife migrated to Hoboken, New Jersey, where he died in 1891. At the time, he was receiving a military pension of $12 per month. There's little evidence of any African-American church structure in Jersey City prior to the year 1850. Those African Americans who did attend church probably went to one of the local white churches that existed in the area at the time. One such church is the old Dutch Reformed Church here on Bergen Avenue near McGinley Square. This building was originally constructed in 1841. It's the third church to exist on this site. When we hear the traffic and see the congestion of the Journal Square and McGinley Square area today, it's difficult to envision the small octagonal building that was originally erected here in the year 1680. One of the earliest members of that church was a gentleman by the name of Joachim Anthony. Joachim Anthony was an African American. He probably spoke fluent Dutch. Joachim Anthony originally joined this church in the year 1679. It was very difficult to become a member of the church at that time. One had to demonstrate a knowledge and proficiency in the Dutch church doctrine. He had to understand Bible history, and he had to be free of any moral character defects. Such a man was Joachim Anthony. Some African Americans continued involvement with the Church of Bergen. The church's register of the members of the Church of Bergen records at least 27 marriages of persons of color. Similarly, the records of St. Matthew's Episcopal Church provide evidence of the burial and baptism of African American members. On August 31st, 1847, Reverend E.D. Barry presided over the funeral of Gregory Edwards' colored child, while on July 12, 1849, Edwina, the daughter of Edward and Charlotte Dorsey, people of color, was baptized. Prior to the Civil War, African Americans began to organize their own churches. A newspaper article dated August 16, 1898, reported that the AME Zion Church on Monmouth Street between 7th and 8th Streets had adopted the name St. Mark's AME Zion Church and had been formally organized in 1860. From St. Mark's evolved Metropolitan Zion AME Church, located on Bergen Avenue, whose late pastor, Reverend Andrew Mapp, stated that the denomination's New York Conference Archives has a record of a St. Mark's AME Zion Church of Jersey City as early as 1846. Another news report dated February 12, 1852, declared that the edifice for the African church has already been enclosed, and that through the generosity of the Friends of the Colored People in Jersey City, Bergen, and vicinity, $450 has been collected and paid to workmen. A second news article indicated that this church was on the side of Bergen Hill, probably today's Mill Road, near Academy Street, at a site donated by Cornelius Traphagen. Mill Road is the historic location of an early African-American settlement where blacks established a small community between Montgomery Street and Academy Street by 1830. The church built here evolved into Mount Pisgah, which is now located on Forest Street. Mount Pisgah claims that the church was founded by Mr. Stephen Barrell in 1850. Other churches with early roots are Calvary CME, now located on Oak Street, which was organized about 1858, and Bethesda Baptist Church, now pastored by Reverend John W. Wright, which was established in 1882. Salem Baptist Church was organized under its current name in 1875. But Salem Baptist had its real beginning in 1859, when a small group of African Americans worshiped with 36 white Baptists who had withdrawn from the First Baptist Church of Hudson City. It was the issue of slavery and the question of whether or not to allow abolitionists to speak at the church that caused their withdrawal. They organized themselves under the name of Bergen Baptist Church. In 1872, they built the beautiful church building that's situated behind us on Madison Avenue and Clinton Avenue in Jersey City. However, they required their African-American colleagues to worship in the upper gallery of the church, in the balcony. Over a period of time, these African-American members resented that, and they began to withdraw from Bergen Baptist. They worshiped in the home of Joseph and Mary Bailey at 9 Harrison Avenue in Jersey City. Reverend J.R. Francis was their first spiritual leader. Ironically, in 1945, Salem bought the church building where their earliest members were required to sit in the balcony. Today, Salem Baptist is one of the great churches of America. As African Americans began to involve themselves in the political system, small signs of progress became evident. In August 1880, the first African American police officer, George Harris, was appointed to the police department. It is not known how long he served, but his first day on patrol reflected the burden of his trailblazer role. It was reported in the Jersey City Argus that over 200 people congregated in a semicircle around the blue-coated descendant of Ham as he left the Grove Street station house at 8 o'clock. The colored policeman was not at all disconcerted, the paper stated, by the gaping and wondering crowd. He accepted the abuse and pushed through the crowd, imitating the swinging step of an old hand. Despite the threats and abuse, Harris performed well. It was reported on August 6, 1880, that the colored policeman made about all the arrests that were made in the 2nd Precinct yesterday. So you see, African Americans have always been part of this community from the very beginning of what is now Jersey City. And we have made progress. And Jersey City's African Americans continue to excel in every field. We can point to successful business people like William Thornton, to those families which have excelled in law enforcement and the judiciary, like the Adamses and the Scotts, and to dedicated educators and public advocates like Julian Robinson. In fact, I'm proud to note that the very cable TV company we are broadcasting from today is operated by an African American, Mr. Arnold McKinnon. And don't forget to know our local historian and keeper of our culture, Mr. Theodore Brunson. Make sure you visit the Afro-American Historical Society Museum and learn more about our heritage. Hopefully,
History will treat our latter-day community members more respectfully and realistically than in the past. But that is exactly why it is so very important to eliminate the stereotypes in favor of the truth. And the truth of what African Americans in Jersey City were, what adversities they lived through, and how they contributed to Jersey City's growth and development. We have seen where Jersey City's African Americans have come from and where they have been. Now, we must continue to move forward.